4th day of June. I was just talking to the last patient, Sam, that I saw last night. We were talking about how, you know, 10 years ago, if you came up with something new every 2 or 3 months to talk about, it wasn't surprising towards the end of the Obama administration. Now, every 10 minutes, there's something else out there that is crossing everybody's mind. Now, I think I may have fixed the broadcast sound, um, uh, the in and out stuff that was going on yesterday. If that problem is continuing today, I just need you to tell me. Now, those of you on the stream, welcome. Um, we had almost 60 people yesterday on the stream. That's the live part. The unlive part, recorded, it comes later. We did well too. So I appreciate you taking the time to be a part of this program. And all the missiles, they're still firing back and forth. And Trump's foot stomping stuff this morning, talking about the various TV networks, as well as what's going on between Iran and Israel, and a few disparaging comments about Israel. I want to try and put all that into context for you so you can better understand it. But as of 6 p.m. local time yesterday in Washington, out on Truth Post, reporting that Israel and Iran had agreed to a ceasefire, President Trump said, "Congratulations to everyone," and wrote that the ceasefire would begin in 6 hours, and in 12 hours, the war will be considered ended. And of course, within the first hour, Israel was firing on Iran, Iran was firing on Israel. So I'll get to more of that, because in the hours since the bombing Sunday, this escalation of warfare, of course, continues to mount. So early this morning, Israel was conducting waves of strikes to knock out what they call regime targets of the nation of 92 million people, while Iran was firing missiles into Israel. Now, one of the things you want to remember about Iran's missiles is the cheaper ones may be getting towards the exhausted state. The missiles that they have left are the super powerful, super fast, extremely destructive missiles. And the question, of course, is if peace isn't established here pretty quick, how much more devastation can Israel put up with if Iran starts sending these super powerful missiles? Now, Tehran fired a mess of missiles at the military base in Qatar in retaliation for the weekend strikes in Iran, which is the headquarters of the U.S. Central Command. Then Sunday night, the Iranian parliament approved the government to close the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil trade flows. You know that. Then President Trump issued threats to Iran against doing that, and so it goes. Now, one of the things that's important to note here about these 6 missiles that Iran fired at the U.S. base in Qatar, right across the Gulf, or just, yeah. How many B-2 bombers Saturday night, Sunday morning are flying over Iran, dropping those bombs? Yeah, 6. So Iran could have fired a whole mess of missiles at the base. And they weren't the fast-flying missiles. They were missiles that were capable of being shot down. Why would Iran waste 6 missiles? Because Iran has thousands of missiles. That's why. So I think it was nothing more than just a recognition of the fact that Russia told Iran to stand down, so that when those B-2 bombers were flying over, Russia had already told Iran, stand down, let them do it. There's nothing there anyway. Let them set off their super big ass missiles, super big bad missiles, and shake the ground a little bit more. The same ground that had been under attack from Israeli missiles for quite some time. The missiles, these big 2 gigantic bunker buster bombs that were dropped, weren't the first missiles to fall, or first bombs to fall on these Fordow and the other two areas, Natanz and Isfahan. Uh, these weren't the first missiles, first bombs to drop there. Israel has been bombing that area for quite some time and sending missiles in there as well. And so these B-2 bombers, of course, were dropping missiles and bombs and rubble that had already been pounded quite a bit by the Israeli Air Force. And it was just a show. I mean, it's just a big show. I mean, this nuclear threat that Trump is making with Russia, and now as a result, there are um, British destroyers accompanying ships through the Baltic Sea area. I mean, this is just, it's ugly, it's scary, it's escalatory, but I think it's a lot of show. And so the details of these military exchanges would just continue to get uglier. The Israeli strikes targeted across the roads to the Fort Al complex, the Evin prison in Tehran, the sites connected to the functioning of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. And the Israeli Defense Minister Katz gloated that the attack hit the heart of Iran. And the commentators praised it for enabling the Iranian people to finally free themselves from the horrible religious persecution of the supreme leader. And I mean, it just goes on. And so in Qatar, they're kind of bragging, especially the American military is bragging about how they knocked these 6 missiles out of the way, or they went astray so that no U.S. personnel were harmed. And President Trump would likewise gloat that Tehran is getting ready to come on its knees and capitulate. And then he posted, following a meeting with his National Security Council in the afternoon, that Iran had informed the U.S. advance of its retaliatory attack. And now maybe they've gotten it out of their system, Trump says. Iran told the U.S. security people, we're going to send some missiles at Qatar. Now, why would they tell them that up front? Well, for one thing, those missiles aren't going to be in the air for more than a few seconds before all the radar picks them up anyway. And the sophisticated radar, once they pick up the trajectory of that missile, they know where it's going. And so they either went astray because of electronic jamming or they were shot out of the air. It was nothing more than a signatory, as far as I'm concerned, response to the 6 B-2 bombers that, as I mentioned yesterday, you notice not one single surface-to-air missile was fired by Iran against those B-2 bombers. And Iran has the ability to shoot them down. They didn't. They didn't because Putin told them not to. And I'm repeating myself now. He said, don't do it for the simple reason the ground's already pounded. It's already pulverized down underneath the ground. Don't worry about it. They can't hurt you any more than it's been hurt. And besides, all the nuclear development is at another location. So the U.S. State Department issued last Sunday evening a worldwide security alert for U.S. citizens anywhere outside the United States because of potential demonstrations against U.S. citizens and interests abroad. So in reality, 3 features of this crisis, as I look at it this morning, are dramatically clear. The process underway can escalate into global warfare, and secondly, the international order is an absolute shambles, and any kind of excuse or accusation is asserted to just perpetrate the horrors that are already underway. And thirdly, there's this glaring split now between one side, the United States, and Israel and the UK, and a few other European nations on the other side, and then the rest of the world. And so there's all this hectic efforts at diplomacy underway right now. But at Sunday's emergency meeting of the UN Security Council, the leaders of many nations are speaking out against the U.S. and Israel's war making. And the draft of a resolution calling for a ceasefire was put into circulation by China, Russia, and Pakistan. And a vote is soon expected on this. And wouldn't it be lovely What is that from? Uh, wouldn't it be lovely if the U.S., as a member of the Security Council, didn't veto it? That this ceasefire that's proposed by China and Putin and Pakistan, Pakistan borders Iran. Pakistan is downwind of anything nuclear exploded in Iran. China needs Iranian oil, and Russia wants this thing to stop. So they put forth a peace proposal with the UN Security Council today, and the United States, the form, is probably going to veto it because the United States doesn't want peace. The United States wants war. And just as the peace president, number 47, campaigned to stop all the wars and start no new wars, has flip-flopped isn't the correct word. Flat out lying is the correct word. I doubt that the UN ambassador to the UN Security Council will do anything but veto this resolution. And so the Organization for Islamic Cooperation, which has 57 member nations, issued a 33-point statement, which included their condemnation of the attacks against Iran, of course, and has called for a ceasefire and a de-escalation of the military aspects of both countries. And so yesterday, Brazilian President Lula da Silva posted a statement by Brazil's foreign ministry expressing very serious concern about the military escalation in the Middle East, and going on to draw out the point of violation of Iran's sovereignty and international law. He said an armed attack on nuclear facilities represents a flagrant transgression of the United Nations Charter and rules of the International Atomic Energy Agency. Now, who cares what Da Silva has to say, except for the fact that Brazil in BRICS is for Brazil, and they want Iran. Iran's already in the BRICS. And so when you do the stepping back, as you need to do to understand anything that happens to prevent you from having some knee-jerk reaction, you have to look at the money. BRICS, the total BRICS nations, and those wanting to come into BRICS, represents a greater GDP than the Western nations put together. And it's going to be a tremendous threat against the existing financial system if BRICS finally gets off the ground and gets moving with their own trading species. And so I believe the real effort that's going on behind this war with Iran from Israel and the United States, now that the United States has declared war on Iran by violating their sovereignty with B-2 bomber attacks, even if they were bombing a dump site, is to stop any further movement of Iran towards BRICS and to bring Iran into the Western financial affiliation. If they could just get him to stop firing missiles. And Iran's not going to stop firing missiles until Israel does. And Israel's not going to stop firing missiles until they subjugate Iran. So just before this stuff happened, Iran's foreign minister, Aghachi, arrived in Moscow, where he met with Putin. The two of them appeared together, giving statements before their meeting started. President Putin said, "The completely unprovoked act of aggression against Iran is without foundation or justification. Russia has long-standing, strong, and trustworthy relations with Iran. We are committed to supporting the Iranian people through our continued efforts." He said that he made calls to Trump, calls to Netanyahu, and the presidents of the UAE and Iran to discuss the crisis. So Foreign Minister Aghachi said that Iran shares close and friendly relations with Russia. In recent years, our bilateral ties have taken on a strategic character. We maintain regular consultations with our Russian colleagues on a wide range of global security issues in the field of Iran's nuclear program. The Russian Federation has been a valuable partner, building the Bushehr their nuclear power plant, remember the one the Germans abandoned, and supporting us in this area, including in the context of reaching nuclear agreements. These acts of aggression by Israel and the U.S. are entirely illegitimate and in violation of international law and established norms and blah, 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 as one would expect them to say in their public pronouncements. But what they had to say privately, we don't get access to that. So Irachi and Putin go on with their meeting, and I think that's where the stand down order came from. The kind of relationship that Russia and Iran have had together. Now, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Lavrov, their Secretary of State, told this Moscow Kremlin Russian TV program. He said this 2 days ago. If every country is allowed to interpret the UN Charter's provision on the right to self-defense as it sees fit, claiming the right applies to whoever and however it chooses, without regard for the UN Charter, then it's no longer a global order. That's complete chaos. And as President Vladimir Putin said earlier today, World War III may no longer be a distant prospect. Now, this is Lavrov, probably the number one statesman on the planet. He said this: the West's intention to use Ukraine against Russia is no longer concealed. Russia is being demonized, and even the term demonized doesn't fully capture the feral aggression we see in both rhetoric and actions. The female members of the European Commission stand out in particular. That's regrettable. Yeah, like von der Leyen, Baerbock. So in harsh words towards Europe, he said, they have completely discredited themselves, especially in sacrificing the interests of their own populations, but most entirely rejected Russian energy resources and turning a blind eye to the terrorist attack on the Nord Stream pipelines. All of this has cost hundreds of billions of euros and has directly affected the well-being of their people. What is happening in Europe now, its economy and social sphere in EU countries are a clear rejection of this. That's the reality. The West, Europe in particular, has revealed its true face time and time again. Now, I am being told that my audio it's very garbled. Now, are you referring to the stream? The stream audio is garbled? Let me know. Now, there's something else I want to get to, a few other things I want to get to. The quality of your audio. I have different audio. I don't know if you mean the stream audio or the radio transmission audio through cable. I assume you mean the stream because you're on the stream. Now, there's another person who's emerging on the scene who's quickly becoming another hero, and that is Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia. In a lengthy ex-post mid-morning, less than 24 hours ago, she says, and Trump's MAGA agenda, including these key promises. The stream audio volume goes in and out. So it's not the microphone. I wonder if I need a computer upgrade. I'll have to find a few more shekels to be able to afford that. The stream audio goes in and out. I thought it was a microphone problem. Anyway, back to Marjorie Taylor Greene. She said, in Trump's MAGA agenda included these key promises: no more foreign wars, no regime change, world peace, and this is what the people voted for. She says, only 6 months in and we're back into foreign wars, regime change, and World War III. It feels like a complete bait and switch to please the neocons, warmongers, military-industrial complex contracts, and neocon TV personalities that MAGA hates and who are never Trumpers. Let me be very clear. My children are 22, 25, and 27. I will literally fight anyone for their future. And their future and their entire generation's future must be free of America's lost, foreign wars, provoke terrorist attacks on our homeland, military drafts, and nuclear war. Go for it, Congressman Green, Congresswoman Green. Okay, now I think the stream audio volume goes in and out. Mark says SoundCloud is loud and clear. I didn't know that I was broadcasting through SoundCloud. All right, so the escalation of the military operations in the Middle East are on. And the latest reports are that the Simple Radio, loud and clear. Thank you. Thanks, Mark. The military operations are on. The latest reports are that the U.S. bases in Qatar were attacked by these 6 missiles, as I said. They were missiles that could do some damage, but open, I assume. Well, the YouTube stream is, I am streaming through YouTube. Some people have said it's a YouTube problem. Some people have said maybe my computer is not strong enough or is strong enough to handle the volume of information that's coming through. I'm sorry to do this technical stuff here in the midst of a broadcast because I'm still trying to work out all these rough edges. Anyway, what is going on is a phase change, where not only are we in a process that can escalate to global nuclear war, but the entire international order is in shambles. I mean, it would be a complete mistake to assume anything like rules or arrangements as they used to be still exist. Because what basically has happened is that by the U.S. condoning the Israeli strikes, unprovoked strikes of aggression against Iran, mind you, topping all of that by Trump obviously ordering U.S. strikes against the nuclear sites in Iran, which is completely unprovoked aggression. It has no basis in international law. It has no basis in the American constitutional law, mind you. And it's completely taking apart any idea that there's anything where people can still go, because it's a complete disrespect for any kind of legality as it would derive from the UN Charter or any other such documents. And that means we are really in a chaotic breakdown of the world system right now. And I think the fallout is, if this military side of it can even be stopped, is unclear. The minimum which would happen is that because of the U.S.-Israeli joint action and some European leaders condoning that and backing it up fully, a split has occurred between these countries and the overwhelming majority of world majority. Where yesterday there was this emergency UN Security Council meeting where a draft resolution was proposed, which probably will be voted on today, as I said earlier. And where, for example, Nebenzia's remarks, the ambassador, part of which are at the end of the full status report, are really giving the tone of what's going on, because what Nebenzia said is this: in doing so, Washington has yet again demonstrated its complete disregard for the position of the international community and reasserted that to advance the interests of its Israeli ally, it is prepared not only to turn a blind eye to the killing of tens of thousands of Palestinian women and children and elderly people, but also to gamble with the safety and well-being of all humanity. Through its actions, the U.S. has opened Pandora's box, and no one knows what the new consequences of this may lead to. And then there are other 14 representatives of the UN Security Council. There were speeches by Pakistan, Algeria, Somalia. I mean, you could really see that something is breaking down here. There's a bit of hysteria. There's a bit of complete craziness. Now, why is the U.S. still supporting Israel with all the human rights They're literally shooting children in the head. Yeah, you're right. They are. They are literally shooting. I've seen the pictures. Not shrapnel holes in the child's skull, but a round hole in the child's skull. I've seen it. Why? Because because of AIPAC, because of the Israeli lobby. Netanyahu has more power in the U.S. Senate and House than Trump does. Now, these are good points you're making, Nubs. He says then on the other side of Europe, you have the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. Where do you think the Nazis went after Germany fell? Well, they went to America through paperclip. They went to Argentina and Paraguay, and they went to Ukraine. You're right. All right. So anyway, I can only explain at this point. This is a complete shattering of anything that ever existed in terms of lawfulness until now. And I'm not so sure it can be repaired because now the big question is, was Trump complicit even way back in the Operation Spiderweb that went on in the Ukraine? And I think the fallout from this, can I get closer to my mic? I'm just about, yeah, just about eating it. I'll try that. And I noticed on the recording here, Paul, the signal strength has decreased from where it was to begin with. It almost filled the entire screen. Now it's much smaller. So something's happened, I think, at the station. Anyway, I can only say what's going on now is the end of international law. It's a complete trampling of any kind of international law. Obviously, there is absolutely diplomatic activity going on, and one of the most important, obviously, is the Iranian foreign minister Rachi's meeting with Putin in Moscow, where Putin had already said that this was a completely unprovoked aggression, and probably many more things that we'll find out in time. Trump probably will be holding a meeting here sometime today, if it hasn't already started, with the National Security Council officials. And the UN Security Council is going to be meeting again today on a resolution to vote on the resolution and other topics. And I just hope and pray the U.S. won't veto it this time. Now, at the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the OIC, now the signal is much bigger there on the recording at K-Talk. This last weekend, the meeting of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, they had a 13-point statement calling for immediate ceasefire, de-escalation, and condemnation of Israel. And then Arachi spoke there on Saturday, and he had separate meetings with the Egyptian leaders. And the meeting proceeded quite well, but then that was interrupted by the news of the bombs over Saturday and Sunday. So Russian foreign minister, and then remember, these bombs, I think this is all just sound and fury. I can't say signifying nothing anymore, because what they're trying to signify is that somehow they have control of all of this stuff. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov said that the use of the right of self-defense to attack another country in the name of self-defense is going to lead to complete chaos. And he condemned Israel's actions with the bombing of Isfahan, Natanz, and Fordow. So the use of the right to self-defense without consideration of the UN Charter leads to complete chaos. That's what Lavrov just said. And he said if every country interprets the right to self-defense in the way of I decide for myself when to use this right, and I don't want to look back at the Charter, I'll do what I want to do when I want to do it, then you no longer have law. So there are some very harsh statements being made by the VIPs kind of people in the effectiveness of the veterans, VIPs, the Veterans Oh, it's the veterans who are made up of military veterans as well as CIA and intelligence veterans. Um, who are making comments on the effectiveness of the U.S. strike on those 3 nuclear sites in Iran, where Trump basically made statements that the mission was accomplished with total success. Excess said it was brilliant. But if you listen to Scott Ritter, he completely takes it apart and says it's a complete fraud because these were all nuclear sites which were hit by Israeli military before. So the expectation that there would be anything worth talking about left in these sites is completely out of the question, Ritter says, and that all the relevant material for sure has been brought to other locations. So it was just window dressing. It was complete theater. And he's also extremely critical that this is putting at risk many American lives, American soldiers, because a counterattack by Iran can be expected. And then he also pointed to the fact that this operation, he was asked by Napolitano, what was the cost of this thing on the Napolitano's podcast yesterday with Ritter. And Ritter says that he didn't have the exact figures on the tip of his tongue, but to fly those bunker buster bombs all the way from the United States and back, which was 36 hours of flying, he said probably cost at least $100 million. And for what? For just absolute theater. However, this is obviously not getting anywhere to Trump yet. And so Israel bombed Iran early this morning. Defense Minister Israel Katz said that they're striking regime targets like offices of Iran's military, the IRGC. Then today, already the U.S. State Department issued a world security alert telling U.S. citizens worldwide to be careful. And then Vice President Vance, I don't know what to think of him. I had some real high hopes of him at one time. I'm not sure what to think of the latest expression of Vance because he's completely 100% with Trump on this matter. And he said, this is not like any other Middle East military operation, what took place, the B-2 bombings. He said these were all done, and you probably heard this, but it made me cringe when I heard him say this. This was all done by dumb presidents as compared to Trump, who is not a dumb president. Now, think about that. Just think about that for a second. The vice president of the United States, he doesn't necessarily, remember that's an elected office. Trump can't fire him. He can be impeached by Congress, tried by Congress, and removed from office by Congress, but Trump can't fire him. And so he says that what has happened up to this point has been done by dumb presidents. He says we are not at war with Iran. I don't know what else you'd call it. Sending in these huge 30,000 pound, at least 6 of them, 30,000 pound bombs into the sovereign territory of a foreign nation who was doing nothing to you. Iran was no threat to the United States whatsoever. Now, if that's not an act of war, if that's not being at war with another country, I don't know what is. And Vance says, well, we're not at war with Iran. We're at war with Iran's nuclear program. That's just like two guys arguing and fighting with one another. And one finally punches the other in the face and breaks his jaw. And he says, you know what? I'm not fighting you. I'm fighting your idiot ideas. We'll see how that stands up in court. So he says, we're not at war with Iran. We're at war with Iran's nuclear program. This was a very precise surgical strike claiming that it had allegedly dismantled Iran's nuclear capabilities, and we know that's a bunch of crap. And then he blasted these dumb presidents of the past, and Vance had said, it's not a regime change operation. Then Trump corrected him by saying it's not politically correct to use the term regime change. And then Trump said, it's not politically correct to use the term regime change, but in if in the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be a regime change? MIGA, MIGA, make Iran great again. Now, this is totally insane. Now, when he's talking about dumb presidents, and you look at George W. Bush, you know you might have some ground for argument. And then you have Obama. I don't think I would call Obama dumb. I don't necessarily agree with Obama's concepts of foreign policy, but I don't know I would call him dumb. Anyway, Putin's aide Yushakov said that Trump's deception and strategic ambiguity puts what into question now. Why are these talks, and what was the role of Trump in Operation Spiderweb in Ukraine? Was that also the same kind of fraud? So all of this naturally has a very huge impact on Trump's base, where apparently starting yesterday there were large demonstrations. I'm sure you know more about that already now with Representative Thomas Massey, the only Republican congressman who signed with 60 Democrats on the congressional statement against the U.S. attack, basically saying that the Constitution has to be respected, that this would require an act of Congress to vote for the U.S. to go to war, and where he got that idea. And now Trump then attacks Massey, which is really stupid. He's probably the only decent congressman in Washington who has at his core belief the Constitution of the United States. So obviously the responses are that Putin announced that they're going to go into a mass production of the Oreshnik missile that was just announced, that they already started a serious production of the Oreshnik, but he brings it back up again. And also Putin brings up the Russian investigation into the terrorism of the Crocus City Hall music concert. Remember that? It was March of last year. Has now definitely concluded that the regime in Kyiv were the ones who gave the orders to carry out that massive killing at Crocus. I mean, that may have some ramification of the attitude of Russia in respect to the situation in Ukraine. And now Arachi, I don't know if he's come back from Moscow yet, but Putin said the completely unprovoked act of aggression against Iran is without any foundation or justification. Russia has long-standing, strong, and trustworthy relations with Iran. We are committed to supporting the Iranian people through our continued efforts. Then Arachi, on his part, emphasized the help of Russia, among others in the Iranian nuclear program, where Russia just picked up the pieces of the Bushehr nuclear power plant that I was telling you about, that Germany, after Germany disengaged. I mean, it was originally a German project, and then Germany left. Then the Russians went on to continue the project. So obviously, we are sitting on a powder keg in terms of the impact that this is going to have on the world economy and the financial system. Because if the Straits of Hormuz does get blocked, and the Iranian Navy will be there to enforce it, and then the U.S. Navy is there to make sure it's not enforced. Oh, man, it's just... And then I was reading a couple of reports on what this is going to do to the interest rate, not just the price of a barrel of oil. So the Iranian parliament, as I said earlier, approved the closing of the Strait of Hormuz that will affect 20% of global oil shipments. And the Strait of Hormuz is somewhat unique because it has width and depth that allows them to handle the world's largest crude oil tankers. And there are very few alternatives to compensate. I mean, if that strait is closed, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, it will be bad news for everybody. And the U.S. has already announced that the Iranian Navy will regret it if they close the Strait of Hormuz, because we, the U.S., will basically reopen it by bombing whoever is there in the way of blocking it. Well, what do you do? What do you do with two countries talking like that to each other? And then also China's Global Times had this editorial yesterday warning that the U.S. bombing of Iran seriously violating the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and international law not only heightens the tensions in the Middle East, but also risks triggering a wider crisis. This action, in essence, bypasses both the UN Security Council and the IAEA framework, attempting to unilaterally resolve the Iranian nuclear issue through force. Now, there isn't an ominous thing here, afoot, afloat, since we're talking about the Gulf, um, which I think the whole operation, this whole thing that's happened the last few days, was under the control of the software from Palantir. And you probably have seen some of the reports about that. And on the estimate of the nuclear work of Iran, which they put out as a report on June 11th, basically saying that Iran is enriching way beyond the allowed limit and that Iran would be moving in the direction of building nuclear weapons, obviously completely contradicting what Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard had officially stated back in March. Now, Palantir, remember this, we're talking about artificial intelligence here. And it's artificial intelligence that's saying that what was going on in Iran was building nuclear weapons, even though the IAEA said that's not true. And then Tulsi Gabbard, sitting on top of all the intelligence networks, of which there's only 5 or 6. What is there, like 21, I think? 21 intelligence agencies in the US government. There's only about 5 or 6 that actually have boots on the ground, that have been very, very intensive and global in their sourcing of information. And those 5 or 6 said, no, they're not building a nuclear weapon. So this is, this idea of definitely a role, this Iranian bomb being an immediate threat, is definitely a role of the software program by Palantir, which was then corrected June 17th by the International Energy Administration, saying that that was a mistaken assessment. And then obviously the damage had been done by then. And this was something that was pointed out by Alistair Crook on Strategic Culture. You can Google that. That shows you that if artificial intelligence is led, first of all, we don't know what it really looks like, but if artificial intelligence is not controlled by appropriate levels of human checking, we can see that maybe World War III could be triggered by that. Because it's Palantir's artificial intelligence that said there was nuclear development at these sites in Iran. And the best human intelligence said, no, that's not true. So there's many ramifications of this, and one obviously being that the Europeans who have backed up Israeli and U.S. action, like German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. I mean, he basically said, and this is terrible, he basically said in an immediate response after the Israeli attack that he said the Israelis are doing the dirty work for us. Now, there's a lot of hysteria about that because several people are pointing out that the language to call your opponent dirt or insects or whatever, that comes right out of the German repertoire of the Nazis 80 years ago. And the German response to this inside Germany is, I mean, the comedians are having an incredible time with this. Anyway, today is supposed to be the NATO summit, the annual NATO summit in The Hague, and they had some big problems putting together a single page resolution, just one, where everybody could agree. So they had to make all kinds of changes. And when you have so many cooks in the kitchen deciding on how the soup is going to be put together, you end up with a pretty bad soup. And so, with all of these voices trying to put this single page resolution together so that everybody will agree with it, they still mention Russia as an aggressor or a threat, but they no longer promise the access of Ukraine to becoming a member of NATO. This is significant. This is the first time anything out of NATO or the European Commission has put forth a paper, a statement that does not require Ukraine to become a member of NATO. Now, in The Hague, where this NATO summit is taking place, they're expecting major protests. They're going to have 27,000 policemen, and in addition, 10,000 troops, almost 40,000 people as police and security forces. And so naturally, large demonstrations are also announced, and they will basically cordon off the entire area to make sure the demonstrators are not getting anywhere near close to what is going on. And they had to say, and this is as striking and surprising as anything else, that the meeting is only going to be 2.5 hours. The annual NATO summit meeting that has gone on for days is now only going to be 2.5 hours long. You know why? You know what the scuttle is? Why are they cutting it down to 2.5 hours? Because Trump has a very short concentration span. They've announced that, and they don't want to over-challenge him, so the meeting's going to be relatively short. I mean, this is a complete fraud. I mean, the G7 in Canada just ended with a complete failure, demonstrating that G7 institution is now defunct. And it's not impossible today that at the end of the NATO annual summit meeting, that NATO might suffer the same fate. So if you look at this picture as a totality, everything is out of order. It's like a giant popcorn popper where all the popcorn went off at the same time and they're all in the air and we don't know how it's going to land. If you you cannot allow the collapse of international law. If you allow the collapse of international law by letting the international lawbreakers, President Trump, get away with what he did in Iran and what's going on in the Ukraine and several other places where things are breaking out, especially sub-Saharan Africa. This is going back to the conditions before the Peace of Westphalia. Because before the Peace of Westphalia, you did not have anything like international law. It was established by 4 years of discussions in Osnabrück and Münster in Germany from 1644 to 1648, 4 years. And it was on the principle of the Peace of Westphalia, which finally established international law between these countries, without which it couldn't exist. And it went on then to become the updated modern times as the United Nations Charter. And obviously what's at stake is that entire revolution of a legal body of international law. Because if the United States can do this and get away with what they've done, who could stop anybody else from saying the same thing? I'm attacking the following country for my self-defense because I can see in 10 years they're going to have the following weapon systems, and therefore I have to knock them out now while I still can. Now, how do you justify that? You can't. And all the international legal experts who've spoken out basically say that nothing in what Iran has been doing would justify what the United States just did. because even the idea that they may build a nuclear weapon is not enough if no immediate threat results from it. So this is a very serious matter, and the proposal that's been put forth, especially by the Schiller Institute and the president, Diane Sayre of the LaRouche organization, is going to be on Paul's show Friday morning, and that'll be fantastic. But without a completely new, remodeled international development of security architecture, you've got to take into account every single country on this planet, and that's what needs to be actively put on this agenda. And when you look at the agenda of today's meeting of the annual NATO summit, limited to 2.5 hours because of President Trump's attention span, they said that. Oh, well. Um, it's a time to be bold. It's a time for you to continue your emails, your letters, your phone calls, whatever else to your representatives in Washington, that they don't jump on the bus and start bombing other people in the name of our own defense when the other people haven't done anything to trigger any kind of concern against our defense, but only in our imaginations do we fear and perceive that something bad could happen. Now, I want to get back to Representative Massey for a minute. President Trump's political operation has launched this aggressive effort to unseat Kentucky Rep. Thomas Massey. I think I mentioned him from Tennessee the other day. He's from Kentucky. Its first such attempt to defeat a sitting Republican incumbent. And I'm getting this from Axios. Trump's 500 million political apparatus is probably the most powerful, well-funded force in American politics. That's what his party has, $500 million. And it gives Trump a weapon with which to target any lawmaker who crosses him. And so Trump's team has launched Kentucky MAGA, a super PAC that is devoted to defeating Massey in the May primaries of Kentucky next year. Now think about that for a minute. Yes, he is questioning the president's motives in stepping outside of his constitutional authority to bomb Iran. Not just bomb it a little bit. He also has had problems with other extra constitutional efforts on the part of the president. And so the president sees him, I suspect, as a focal point for other Republicans who do not have the strength of will or the courage of Thomas Massey, as a gathering point. Now, Axios writes that Massey has attacked Trump over his strike on Iran, saying that it's not constitutional. We know that. Prompting the president to fire back on Truth Social that the congressman is not MAGA. Now, think about that one for a minute. It's like what George Bush Jr. said, you're either for us or against us. There's no middle ground for discussion. There's no middle ground for another opinion or some kind of compromise. You're either MAGA or you're not MAGA. I have some words for that, but I don't want to offend my MAGA friends. So he also called Massey weak and ineffective and disrespectful to our great military and all that they stand for. I mean, he seems to have forgotten that he attacked the concept of foreign wars in his own campaigning last year. And now, of course, he's broken his promises there. Massey's called him on it. Now he wants Massey thrown out of office, or at least blocked from any further representation of the great state of Kentucky by defeating him in the primaries. And they have the money to do it. Massey also voted against Trump's big, beautiful bill last month, one of only 2 Republicans to oppose it. Then Trump called for him to be voted out of office back then, even before this his descriptions of the president being extra constitutional. So Trump's team claimed that they had done polling in Kentucky, which shows that Massey is vulnerable. But Massey himself responded with this: any serious person considering running should spend money on an independent poll before letting swampy consultants take them for an embarrassing ride. Massey's also opposed Netanyahu's war in Gaza. He has helped to pass a bill restricting the NSA and the CIA surveillance of you and me. And he opposed the Biden bill bailing out the banks, among other, in my opinion, very notable measures. My hat is off to you, Congressman Massey. Now, Vice President Vance has pushed back against the comparisons between our airstrikes on Iran and previous American wars in the Middle East, claiming that this time it's different. When you look at America's wars, remember when the PNAC document came out, there were 7 countries that the PNAC document, I mentioned that to somebody yesterday, they didn't know what I was talking about. And they seem to think that they were really up on current affairs and they don't know what the PNAC is. The Project for a New American Century came out in 1991. And they said there's 7 countries that have to have regime change. They didn't put it that way, but that's what they're talking about. Starting with Iraq and going through all of them down to Iran being the last one. And that's where we're at. However, Vance is saying, you can't really compare that because our country's airstrikes on Iran and previous American wars in the Middle East, claiming that this time, this is different because this time Washington's actions are truly limited and rooted in national security objectives, not a drive for regime change. And then that's when the president corrected him. So an interview with NBC News this Sunday on Meet the Press, and I'm getting this from RT, Vance emphasized that we are not at war with Iran, we are at war with Iran's nuclear program, and describing that the overnight strike was a very precise, very surgical operation that ostensibly dismantled Tehran's nuclear capabilities. And then responding to concerns that the United States could be drawn into another prolonged conflict, Vance said the difference lies in leadership. We are the best. He said this: I certainly empathize with Americans who are exhausted after 25 years of foreign entanglements in the Middle East. But the difference is that back then we had dumb presidents. Now we have a president who actually knows how to accomplish America's national security objectives. So this dumb statement, I think, is not likely to persuade Americans who voted for Trump because they were believing that he would prevent future wars. Trump apparently did not clear Vance's statement before Vance made it, because then Trump, as I mentioned earlier, posted on Truth Social just a few hours later. He said, and I'm going to repeat myself, it's not politically correct to use the term regime change. But if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be a regime change? And he said, MIGA, M-I-G-A, make Iran great again. But one of the wags out there said, the new phrase should be make America Great Britain again. Ooh, you gotta love that one. All right. Um, I think I'm gonna move in a slightly different direction, um, other than the Iranian government calling for the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. The parliament voted for it. I can't get any aerial pictures to let me know how that's progressing. But closing the strait will have serious implications for both global and U.S. economy, not the least of which you will see interest rates rise. And though we get very little oil benefit from Iran, except in the presentation of trade differences, it's still going to increase the barrel of oil, maybe to over $100 a barrel. And don't stop. Don't think for one second that's not going to stop prices going up here. Now, closing the strait that's located between Iran and Oman, it's very wide, it's very deep, as I was saying earlier, so that the world's largest oil tankers, these things are immense, millions of gallons. Makes this whole area a very critical check or choke point for this problem. Now, Secretary of State Rubio uh, Sunday urged China to intervene to prevent Iran from closing the Strait of Hormuz. So, in the interview on Fox News Sunday Morning Future, Rubio said, I would encourage the Chinese government in Beijing to call them about that because they heavily depend on the Straits of Hormuz for their oil. If they do that, it'll be another terrible mistake. It's economic suicide for them to do this. And we retain options to deal with that. Yeah, sending in the American Navy and forcing the Straits open. Right. Are we at the top of the hour? We're after the, and I programmed a break into the stream that would match the break at K Talk, but because regular transmission at K Talk is not working, I'm going to have to continue to talk, even though I love a break right now. I want to talk about how war is peace. War is peace. I always enjoy talking to patients about subjects like this. When they bring it up, I don't. I want to talk about the nervous system. I want to talk about turning their lights back on. I want to talk about giving them their life back because you are your nervous system. And that's what I'm working on. I'm not working on back pain, though I do. I'm not working on stiff necks, though I do. I'm not working on sciatic pain down the leg, though I do very effective work with sciatica. Usually, one correction, you get 90% better. I'm working with the nervous system. And in all of the unseen world around us that is full of all of the electromagnetic transmissions, all of the TV stations that still broadcast through the air, the radio stations that broadcast through the air, all those vibrations, those frequencies are passing through us all the time. But also in the unseen world are all the infinite quantum potentials in waveform that can be collapsed through observation into the particle form as we create our reality. One person's reality can be very, very different from another one simply because of the imaginative differences that exist. And where am I going? The healthier your nervous system, the more you can actually relate the seen world and the unseen world together around you. I take care of people who have certain nervous system limitations that prevent them from full cognizance the brain offers. They can't think straight. They're confused. They're muddled. I take care of people who have terrible emotional imbalances that are brought on by nothing but other than nerve interference. A lot of it is a result of uh, nutritional deficiencies, of course, but a lot of it is interference in the nervous system. And so the job that I do, very gentle, mind you, at the very top of the neck, you hardly know that I'm there in the work I'm doing that's based on X-ray analysis to reset that balance point between the head and the neck is absolutely life-changing in so many people that I can take care of. Paul, I think we might try that tomorrow. But thank you for your input there. And so when people come to me because they're diabetic or they have peripheral neuralgia or they have just some kind of neuropathies, dizziness, vertigo, I've seen a lot of that lately, sleeplessness, just loss of energy. All these things respond so well when I clear out that neurological deficit that allows the full expression of life to return to the human body, as the nervous system is the antenna between you and this unseen world. You're not your heart, because we can replace that. You're not your lungs or your kidney or your liver or even your pancreas, because those things can be stuck inside you from some willing donor who doesn't need them anymore because they're not here anymore. We can replace skin, but we can't replace the nervous system because that is absolutely uniquely you. But one thing we can do is stop the interference patterns in that nervous system that leads to disease, dis-ease, that leads to the common things that people complain of, that they turn to drugs in order to deal with the problems of nerve interference and malnutrition. Treating with poisons the symptoms simply of malnutrition and spinal misalignment. And when I get my patients to understand that, they just absolutely revel in how they feel and the improvement that's taking place inside their body. All right, so let's take a look at that. So I think I'm going to go on, Paul. I'm going to start talking about how war is peace. I think that's well, that ended. I think that's a great idea because we're at very dangerous crossroads in our history now. And I don't want my show to be a pronouncement of fear. And as far as what I do, my consultations are free. They usually run about a half an hour. I need to know what's wrong. I need to know your history. I need to know if it relates to what we do. And if it is, I'm prepared to take care of you. If you don't want to, that's fine. We'll still be friends. You can go on your way. It won't cost you anything up to that point. But you need to make an appointment. You can go to forbiddendoctor.com and make an appointment online, or you just call the office. It's 01523-1890, and we'll talk to see if I can help. All right, now, war is peace. Killing is good if it brings peace. World War III, if it ever breaks out, I think is going to be terminal. Albert Einstein understood the perils of nuclear war and the extinction of life on the earth, which has already started with the radioactive contamination resulting from depleted uranium spread around parts of Europe and the Balkans. in the Middle East, not to mention Fukushima. And I think it was Einstein that said, I know not with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. So the media, the intellectuals, the scientists, the politicians, all in chorus obfuscate the truth, namely that war using nuclear warheads will destroy humanity. And what has been called fake news has become the real news. Real news by the independent online media is now tagged as Russian propaganda, which is what I'm delivering to you, of course, by some people's criticism. In turn, the independent media, where I turn for most of my information, is the object of censorship via the search engines and social media. If the search engines won't go there like they used to, or if social media will not go there, then I know it's a place to go to. And what we're dealing with is not just war breaking out between the US and Iran and the ongoing wars everywhere they are around the planet. What we're dealing with is a war against the truth. The objective reporting on the dangers of a third world war is being suppressed. The future of humanity is at stake, as Marjorie Taylor Greene said about her 3 kids in their 20s in reference to the draft. The future of nuclear annihilation, unfortunately, is not front page news as it was back in the 50s, moving into the 60s. And so the unfolding consensus among Pentagon war planners is that a third world war is winnable. And there are some crazies in there. Trying to remember his name. He was a rear admiral who said a limited nuclear war is winnable on the part of the United States. And so what is being proposed is the possibility of a limited nuclear strike as an instrument of peace. The concepts of moral rightness are simply turned upside down, and political insanity is prevailing everywhere you turn. And so this diabolical discourse is unfolding, the so-called more usable tactical nuclear weapons, the B-6111 and the B-6112, with an explosive capacity anywhere from about 1/3 of to 12 times the Hiroshima bomb, are now being referred to as peacekeeping bombs because they say they're harmless to the surrounding civilian population because the explosion occurs underground. They penetrate the surface of the ground, they go down 200 feet and then explode. And of course, the dust and the dirt that comes flying 5 miles into the sky that has just been irradiated by this fissionable explosion isn't radioactive. These are the weapons which are contemplated for use against North Korea. They've been mentioned earlier, not lately, against Iran, and is what is described by the Pentagon as a bloody nose operation with limited civilian casualties. And the corporate media just loves this stuff. Now, lest we forget, when the first atomic bomb was dropped in Hiroshima, 100,000 people died within the first 7 seconds. Needless to say, today's nuclear weapons are far more advanced than those dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki 80 years ago. And when war becomes peace, when war is used as an instrument of peace, it's the machine of peace. the world is turning completely upside down. Gone are the concepts of the Treaty of Westphalia, where these opposing forces for 150 years of war in Europe sat down and said, okay, okay, we hardly have any young men left. What can we do to stop this? And they sat there and they wrote out their propositions. And it gave them years and years, decades and decades of peace thereafter, until again the greed showed up. Now, the Pentagon and NATO, as you well know, are beating the drums of war. And what is at stake is a worldwide media disinformation campaign in support of a third world war, which would inevitably lead to nuclear annihilation. Even though we have crazies in the Pentagon who say the use of a tactical nuke in the right location would be all we have to do to end this conflict. And anybody who honestly believes only one nuke would be fired, what's the other side going to do that has nukes? Well, okay, all right, we'll stand down. In the words of Fidel Castro, in a nuclear war, the collateral damage would be the life of all of humanity. The use of nuclear weapons in a new war would mean the end of humanity. And today there is this imminent risk of war with that kind of weapon, and I don't harbor the least doubt that an attack by the United States and Israel against the Republic of Iran would inevitably evolve towards a greater nuclear conflict. There would be collateral damage, as the American political and military leaders always affirm, to justify the deaths of innocent people. Collateral damage. So, when war is upheld as a humanitarian endeavor endorsed by the self-proclaimed international community, pacifism and the anti-war movements are criminalized. Yet I think it should be noted in the course of the last 15 years, the anti-war movement has largely become defunct. Civil society organizations have been co-opted. So what is required to create a cohesive grassroots counter-propaganda campaign? How do we get this country back on foot away from this madness and this insanity? Well, there's no easy solutions. What is required is the development of this broad-based grassroots network that I think the 10 points, Helga Zeppler-Rusch's 10 points, is a beautiful place to start. Perhaps Diane Sayre can talk a little bit about that this weekend. The military oath, and I've thought about this many times. The military oath, taken at the time of induction, demands unbending support and allegiance to the U.S. Constitution, but it also demands that U.S. troops obey the orders of their president and commander-in-chief. Are you aware of that? Oh, excuse me. I state your name, do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers appointed over me, according to the regulations and the Uniform Code of Military Justice, so help me God. Now, what do you do when the president and the commander in chief that you've sworn allegiance to has blatantly violated the tenets of domestic and international law? So that making an oath to obey the orders of the president is tantamount to violating rather than defending the US Constitution. Because the Constitution is very clear about who declares war. Now, this is also from the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It makes it clear that military personnel need to obey the lawful command of his superior officer and the lawful order of a warrant officer and the lawful order. In each case, military personnel have an obligation and a duty to only obey lawful orders and indeed have an obligation to disobey unlawful orders. I'm quoting from the Uniform Code of Military Justice, 809.art.90. You have just as much an obligation to disobey an order if it's unlawful. Unlawful orders, this is still in the Uniform Military Code of Justice. Unlawful orders, including orders by the president that do not comply with the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the moral and legal obligation is to the U.S. Constitution and not to those who would issue unlawful orders, especially if those orders are in direct violation of the Constitution. Now, under fire, you probably ought to be obeying your superior officer. But when bullets start zipping over your head and commands are given in direct opposition to constitutional principles, then what do you do? According to Principle 6 of the Nuremberg Charter, the fact that a person acted pursuant to order of his government or a superior does not relieve him from responsibility under international law, providing a moral choice was in fact possible to him. Now, suppose, I was going to suggest something that's really unrealistic. I was going to suggest maybe one of those B-2 pilots, having studied outside of their immediate environment what is really going on in the world, had a real problem with delivering one of these gigantic 30,000-pound bombs on a foreign nation without a command or declaration of war by the U.S. Congress, decided not to do it. Didn't push the button to release the bombs. And I think these 6 jets that had a bomb apiece in them, I think apparently they're the only aircraft capable of carrying a 30,000-pound bomb, 15-ton bomb. At altitude and speed. Suppose he had a different, suppose he felt it was an unlawful order, especially if it was going to fall on the public. What about the pilot of the Enola Gay? They weren't completely clear on the devastation possibilities of the little man and big boy when they were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Of course, the Nagasaki one, just a few days later, the pilot may know by then what had happened to Hiroshima. But what if at the last minute they had refused to do that because they knew that they were going to incinerate 100,000 human beings within 7 seconds? Now, they didn't know that. This knowledge was kept from the pilot and the crew of the Enola Gay, because they might at the last second decide not to do that. Would you be obligated to disobey an unlawful order? Or are you compelled at that point through the Uniform Code of Military Justice and your oath to follow and obey the orders of the President of the United States, as well as defend the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic? This might happen. It might get to this point. We know that a lot of the drones that have been used in the Middle East and elsewhere that were involved either with surveillance, which who's going to object to that, but actually initiating or firing Hellfire missiles or whatever else, were controlled by people in secluded areas underground in Omaha, Nebraska, watching things from drone cameras with hand controllers, watching a certain target that they were told to take out, and when it was possible, to fire the Hellfire. And of course, they've been told all the way through this experience, you are taking out the enemy and making America safe, even though this is happening in Syria. This is, this. When does the time arrive when you disobey an unlawful order, to abandon the battlefield, to refuse to fight in a war which blatantly violates international law and the U.S. Constitution? Some of the things I think about when I don't have enough other things to think about. And this is not a choice which enlisted men and women can make individually. It's a collective societal thing, which of course requires some kind of an organizational structure. And across the land in the United States, Britain, and Canada, all these coalition countries, there is a new anti-war movement beginning. And part of the job isn't just part of the mission, the scope of an anti-war movement isn't just to try to get the government to stop the war. It's to provide a safe haven for enlisted men and women who've tried to make the moral choice to abandon the battlefield in Iraq or Afghanistan, now Syria and Yemen, because they're being commanded to follow an order in violation of the Constitution. They're committing acts of war against a sovereign nation for which the Constitution requires the House and the Senate and the House to make a declaration of war, not the arbitrary will of the president. Even though they also made an oath to follow the commands of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief of the Army, which is the President of the United States. It's one of those things that sometimes I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning thinking about that keeps me awake. That's not an easy thing. Committees at local levels are starting to be set up in various places around this country, as well as other countries, because they see what's coming. So what do you have to, what has to be done for this to be effective? Well, first off, the truth has to be established. The criminal nature of the military project. I don't know what else to call what happened Saturday night and Sunday morning. We attacked a sovereign nation who was no threat to us, who was not hurting us. In fact, ample evidence was clear they were not developing a nuclear weapon. And a lot of the MAGA crowd just goes ahead and accepts, well, you have to trust the president. He knows what he's doing. But that's in direct violation. That's an act of war. To send 6 of these 30,000-pound bombs into a sovereign nation, and then to walk away from it saying, whoop, there it is. Whoop, there it is. It's all done. It's ended now. When the overwhelming evidence is that that place had been bombed out previously by the Israeli Air Force, and that there wasn't anything left to destroy anyway, because everything of any value, including The highest sophisticated concentrators and centrifuges have already been removed. Then you have to break once and for all the lies and the falsehoods which sustain the political consensus that favors a preemptive war. Kill for peace. We need to attack them before they attack us, and we will call that defense. Which is what Netanyahu has been saying all along. Our need to attack and destroy Iran is Israel's right to defend itself. Then you have to undermine war propaganda, reveal the media lies, reverse the tide of disinformation, and wage a consistent campaign against the corporate media that is paid by these billionaires who profit from the military-industrial complex stock. Then you got to break the legitimacy of the warmongers in high office, like Lindsey Graham. I just saw his smug little face on TV again this morning. And as I've said before, I'm embarrassed that I campaigned for him in 2000. Goes into office with a net worth of 850,000. Now has a net worth of over 42 million. Who knew the US Senate paid that kind of money? You have to dismantle the US sponsored military adventures and all of its corporate sponsors. And then the biggie, a real biggie, bring home the troops that are stationed in countries that are no threat to us whatsoever. And recognize the fact that they're there to protect American hegemony, American corporate interests, at the behest of the CIA, to establish a network of information around the planet that will immediately disrupt anything that gets in the way of the unipolar demand and policies of the US State Department. That's why they're there. Bring them home. I'm not talking about isolationism. I just like John Quincy Adams' idea that it's not the responsibility of the United States to go around looking for monsters around the world to destroy. We need to repeal the illusion that the state is committed to protecting its citizens. What we're doing is to protect you. Our violations of international law is to protect you. Don't you understand that? We know better than you do. And so we use war as a means of establishing peace. Yeah, there's collateral damage, but who was it? Who was the American general said to kill them all, or kill them anyway? God will sort them out on the other side. Something like that in World War II. Was it Patton? I don't know if it was Patton that said that. I'm not sure. We need to expose the fake crises, such as the global flu pandemic, as a means to distract public opinion away from the dangers of global war. So that when's the next pandemic going to show up? When we are at the cutting edge of a nuclear attack. And then to take your mind off of that, there'll be a pandemic, worse than the last one, to confuse and dismantle any cognitive sensibility you might have remaining. Get down to the truth of 9/11. Reveal the falsehoods behind 9/11, which are used to justify the Middle East Central Asian wars under the banner of the global war on terrorism. And like I said yesterday, if I hear one more time how Iran is the sole state-sponsored support of terrorism throughout the Middle East. No, when you attack these other countries and you kill their babies, they don't need Iran to come back at you. Then you want to expose how a profit-driven war serves the vested interests of the banks, the defense contractors, the oil giants, the media giants, the biotech conglomerates. How they're the ones who are being benefited by war for peace. You can't say it without laughing. You want to challenge the corporate media that deliberately obfuscates the causes and the consequences of this war. The main cause of this war is to keep Iraq or Iran out of BRICS. Iran's already in BRICS. That's what it's not regime change, it's not missiles. Although Iran continues to rain missiles into Israel, Israel continues under the ceasefire to send missiles into Iran. I really fear for the future of Israel. How much more pounding can they take before there is no Israel? Power is out in so many areas. Ben Gurion Airport, the only international airport, is unusable. Israeli citizens are now at the coast getting on boats to take them to Cyprus so they can get the hell out of there. And Netanyahu gets on TV praising Donald Trump for understanding the needs of Israel. You have to review and take cognizance of the unspoken tragic outcome of a war waged with nuclear weapons. If you haven't seen Ted Postel or Stephen Starr's presentations on what would happen in a nuclear war, you need to. Not just some of these television day after programs. But these are nuclear war specialists, experts, because this is what they've dealt with. And Postel is a part of the professorship at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I think Stephen Starr is associated with the University of Missouri as a nuclear specialist. And when you see their presentations on what a nuclear explosion does, if the shock wave doesn't get you, then the fire will. If the fire doesn't get you, then the fallout will. If the fallout doesn't get you, then the Civil War will. Then we have to dismantle NATO. NATO isn't there to protect the West from the East. NATO isn't there to protect the West from Russia. Ever since 1991 and the deal between James Baker and Shevardnadze, NATO won't move 1 inch further east if you give up the eastern part of Germany. Lie after lie after lie. Why would anybody, especially Putin, believe anything that came out of the mouth of anybody representing the West now? As the Russian army continues to move further and further westward in the Ukraine. Then you need to implement the prosecution of war criminals in high office. And we have them. Then you need to close down the massive weapons assembly plants and implement the foreclosure on major weapons producers. You need to close down all the U.S. military bases around the world and several of them inside the United States. Oh, my constituency will never go for that. I'm talking about coming back from the edge of nuclear conflagration. You can't just send one nuke as a message. Then I suspect an ever-growing anti-war movement within the armed forces and bridges between the armed forces and the civilian anti-war movement to make sure that while we have a strong military, it's not going out trying to destroy its perceived monsters around the planet that favors the banks and the military industrial complex and costs thousands upon thousands of American servicemen's lives and women. Then you have to kind of forcefully pressure the governments of both the NATO and non-NATO countries to withdraw from the US-led military agenda. When you look at what the protesters in these European nations, a part of the European Union, have to say about their own governments, it's completely different than what their governments are representing. Very similar to our country, except through the charismatic presentation of Trump and what he was promising in his campaign. End the war in Ukraine, end the war in Iran, Iraq, end the genocide, and start no new wars. Like I said yesterday, it'd be different if he fudged a little bit on border policy. If he fudged a little bit with tariffs, if he fudged a little bit with regulations involving the Department of the Health and Human Services or stuff through the EPA or OSHA or some of these other things. That's different than sending B-2 bombers against a sovereign nation. Then you got to develop a consistent anti-war movement in Israel. Because I'm serious, if Israel does not back down from what they're doing with Iran, there isn't going to be an Israel. Then you need to confront and target the pro-war lobby groups, including the pro-Israeli groups in the United States, like Tammy Bruce, who just said America first, behind Israel. Israel's first, then America's first. The State Department spokeswoman just said that. Then you need to dismantle the Homeland Security state and call for the repeal of the Patriot Act so we can once again breathe free. Then you have to call for the removal of the military from civilian law enforcement and reinforce the Posse Comitatus Act. And then call for the demilitarization of outer space and the repeal of Star Wars. You know, people across the land, nationally, internationally, have to mobilize against this diabolical military agenda. My kids are beyond draft age, but some of yours aren't. And it's possible because Putin is not going to stand down, and Iran is not going to stand down, that we may have boots on the ground, as serious as they were in Vietnam. This war can be prevented if people forcefully confront the government, pressure our elected representatives, organizing at local towns, villages, municipalities, spread the word, inform our fellow citizens on the implications of nuclear war, because I think most Americans have the idea that a nuclear war would be over there. And while they would be the first to admit how awful nuclear confrontation would be, it's over there. The Vietnam War was over there. The dead bodies were at Dover Air Force, but the war was over there. What is required is the development of a broad and well-organized grassroots anti-war network that challenges the structure of power and authority. I would not be saying this, I don't think, to the degree that I am, had Trump not attacked Iran. And with all of the excuses you can come up with for his extra constitutional behavior, or that the War Powers Act gives him the right to do something like this. You know, if there wasn't a Republican majority in the House, he would have been, I suspect he would have been impeached yesterday. And if there wasn't a Republican domination in the Senate, he would have been thrown out today as president of the United States. And there are certain members of MAGA in the House and Senate who aren't happy with what just happened, but they're not vocal about it because they don't have the balls that Marjorie Taylor Greene has, or Thomas Massie. I think I've gone on too far about this. But this globalization of war, this idea that peace comes from war, and that's the subtle message that's being given to you. Just let me bomb these nations, and I will protect you. And when you see that I have bombed something, get off my back. I have a good reason for doing that. Leave me alone. I'm the president. You voted me into this position. Yes, but Mr. President, we didn't vote you into office to start war. I'm ending war. I will end war with war. I will bring peace through war. Just be patient and let me do this. Boy, that's awfully reminiscent of the late 30s in Germany, I think. I did not say what you think I said, because I'm talking about a collective expression of the war party in Washington. And I'm afraid President Trump is playing into it. There are more powerful people in Washington than the president when it comes to war. He may be the commander in chief, but it's Congress that declares war. We haven't had a declaration of war since what, 1941? But we've been at war ever since because Congress allows it. And there is a force out there that has greater effect and power over Congress than President Trump. And you know who that is. The Prime Minister of Israel. Congress is more beholden to him than they are to Trump. Every office of the Senate, every office of the House has an AIPAC representative in those offices, except Thomas Massie. And now Thomas Massie is under attack of the president, who's already, with their $500 million war chest in the Republican Party right now, for the money they're going to have to spend in the midterm to try to keep control of the House. That money will be spent in primaries prior to the election of next year, in the midterms, to keep certain people destroyed through the primary, and Thomas Massie is their number one target. Because Thomas Massie won't sit around for what I've just described here for the last half hour. And I'm trying to talk about this dangerous crossroads in our history that we're in now. And when I voted for Trump. I voted for Trump because I couldn't vote for the alternative. And I couldn't not vote for the possibility that the alternative could get in. And I know Utah would go with Trump, and my vote wouldn't have meant one thing one way or the other. Although I know one person who campaigned heavily for Harris, and this person was actually shocked that Trump won in Utah. That's another story. And I'm starting to ramble, and I don't want to ramble. I just wanted to make a few things clear here. And part of one thing I left out in that whole list, this might get some people on edge or upset with me if I say too much about this, but um, one of the strongest forces in this country, and this particular voting bloc put Trump into office. Without this voting bloc, Trump would never have been elected, and that's the evangelical Christians. And sadly, most evangelical Christians will have no desire to read or listen to anything critical of Zionist Israel because they have been totally and completely indoctrinated in this Israeli-centered prophetic futurism of the coming unfolding of the seals, the opening of the seals, and the final judgment and the rapture and all this other stuff that I think is one of the most important factors in the United States today motivating unqualified U.S. support for everything that Israel does. And when Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem, remember, Jerusalem was in Palestine at the formation, May 15th, 1948. And what do we have? What time is it? Oh gosh, we only got a couple of minutes. I'm not going to, I might save my skin by not getting into this. But it's just, see, the problem isn't just Iran and Israel lobbing missiles at each other. It's the absolute insanity that exists in this country that supports that stuff. All right. In order to preserve my own life, just remember, wherefore by their fruits ye shall know them. And when a certain group of people claim to be doing God's will and by their fruits you shall know them, as God himself said in the flesh. All right. I guess I've rambled on here long enough. I hope this show has been somewhat entertaining for you. I don't know what to do at the top of the hour, Paul. Maybe you do, because I don't know how to. Maybe I can turn something on to play. I'm looking at no to all. And then I'm looking at bringing up, do you really want to close button? No. Bringing up something to play there at the top of the hour because I don't think the news is going to cut in. Tomorrow, we talk about health. The male health pack, boy, it's just, we can't keep that on the shelf. More and more people are coming in all the time. I know that there's a lot of guys out there that have trouble with their sexual interest and their vitality. And this, what I'm offering here in Jack's Pack for Men's Health is they're not drugs. You know, you don't take a couple of these tablets and then all of a sudden you're Tarzan. These feed the system that produces Tarzan. Let me put it that way. And so because it's food, it takes a little time for these things to kick in, but we're already getting really good positive feedback. And if you've lost that drive of what it means to be a man in your brain, really not just talking about other parts of your body, but in your brain, in your heart, to get up and go, to get that energy, to get back on your feet, to conquer the world, if that desire has disappeared to some degree, then I suggest you take a serious look at this. It's just Jack's Pack Men's Health. It's available in the office. It's discounted, 15% off. Or you can call and we'll ship it to you. Call 801-523-1890. 801-523-1890. and to get some zip back in the as one. Well, no, I can't say that. It's just some vernacular that might not be appropriate for the children who are listening. All right, I think that's going to do it for the show. Those of you who are a part of the stream, I really appreciate it if you can like and subscribe and click the notification thing because I promise here before long, be doing a lot of this in unscheduled times when a crisis shows up, as many other podcasters do. I want to be able to do the same thing and offer the same thing for you. So I'm going to end the stream and thank you for your listening. Listen, if I didn't see these numbers here, I wouldn't do this. And I appreciate the fact that you're listening and the numbers continue to grow. Thank you so much. I'll be back.